Are you ignoring the personal relationship that is so important when it comes to personalized learning? This week, we're going to explore how to put the personal back into your personalized learning planning. Welcome to another session of Learner's Mindset Discussion. I'm Dr. Dwayne Harapnik, and my esteemed colleague is.
Dr. Talissa Thibodeau.
Today, we're going to be exploring the topic of individualized learning, personalized learning, perhaps even individualized instruction or differentiated instruction. There's a lot of terms that are used to describe something that the software industry refers to as personalized learning, that sometimes we as educators mistake for personalized learning, but is really just a form of an old model of computer-aided instruction. And I think we need to address the fact that genuine personalized learning is significantly different than giving a learner a piece of software to do drill exercises on and then calling that individualized or personalized learning. So I think we want to explore that. Any initial thoughts on where we're going today?
I think this is a hot topic right now because we're kind of moving into that space of personalized learning and what does that really mean? I know what, from being a classroom teacher myself, I know what personalized learning sort of started as, and that was exactly as you said, putting a student on a computer and allowing them to experience a learning path using a particular software that was supposed to be somewhat personalized for them. But what I'm what I learned is that there's really no choice or voice in that personalized learning path to give the students what they need to be successful. So I'm looking forward to exploring this a little bit more.
Well, and I think we need to set some of the context at the beginning. And you identified it generally involves a piece of software. Actually, it always involves a piece of software. And I did my undergraduate no, I did my master's and my PhD at the University of Alberta. And at the University of Alberta, we had used a system in the 70s and 80s called Plato, which is one of the original computer-aided instruction systems that was attached to the mainframe. And so I worked out of the School of Education that had a very, very rich history of computer-aided instruction. And the personalized learning that we are still seeing today is based on the idea that with mathematics or with English or some type of a rules-based system, you have a series of questions and activities that a learner does with the aid of a computer. And then whatever responses that the student gives, the computer goes through a list of, is that right or wrong? And then there is an automated response that if a student makes a mistake with an integer or something or fractions or something, well, then guess what? You go down a path that allows the student to sort of identify the area that they made the mistake in. And in that sense, yeah, it is personalized. It does identify what students need to do. And these are actually quite useful systems when you're practicing, when you're doing some drill, and when you're working through very limited rule-based systems like mathematics, like language, like these work really, really well in well-defined areas. I actually did a graduate level statistics course on a computer-aided system that a colleague of mine built. And it didn't take long for me to learn how to actually game the system and use the multiple responses to get the right answer I was looking for to be able to go ahead and move through the system. And so if you're a savvy learner, you can actually learn how to actually game the system. Now, that was many years ago, and I know these tools have progressed and it's harder to do that, but they're really designed for very, very specific rules-based systems that will help a learner deal with some real basic fundamental ideas and practice. Now, is that sound like the systems you were using, or was there something else that I'm missing?
Yeah, I thought about when you were talking of the word you just described almost perfectly, remediation. So using these software tools for remediation, they are great for that, language instruction and some of those pieces. Taking it to the elementary level, which is where most of my experience is at, we used iStation, we used Fast Math, we used Compass Odyssey. And I think what's good is it kind of gives a one data point or a snapshot of where students could use some additional assistance to then personalize the learning even more, taking it a little bit away from remediation and getting it to the point where students have an opportunity to make some choices about how they design and learn their work or how they present what they're learning. And that's not always can always be used. It just depends on the level of students, you know. So if the students in high school, it might be a little more appropriate that they design and present a presentation. Elementary, some of the remediation programs are great. And they give you some formative feedback in terms of how you can tailor your instruction and then maybe work with your small groups. So that makes sense. I was just thinking about, you know, how heavily we lean onto some of those programs though because of the data that's collected. You know, the administrator, we operate under this, and we've talked about this before, under this thinking of what gets measured gets done kind of thing. And so these software tools produce these data reports that administrators take a look at. And sometimes we think, oh man, if we just go down this pathway and we remediate our students and the data improves, everything gets better. But sometimes what that does is it isolates the remediation from the learner, and the learner is the one we want to impact. You know, they're the ones that we want to help grow and get them prepared for life, and not just set them on a remedial program and say, yeah, I'm going to do blended learning today. And you know, that might be part of it, but it shouldn't be what we call personalized learning. That's my point. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I agree, and there's a lot there that we can unpack, and I want to also touch on this notion of remediation and the data points. And when I was first exposed to these systems, and I actually used to build these systems using the tool called Authorware, so I programmed some of these methodologies, and I was involved in implementing these in a variety of elementary schools across Alberta. So I saw how they were used, and you're right, they were used as a remedial tool. So if people had problem, well, then you put them on the tool. Or if students need to practice, it's like using flashcards. And guess what? Rote memorization, the drill practice, these are all useful strategies. They are all things that we use, and there are times when our learners need to practice certain skills. They have to practice certain things, and they have to memorize certain things. And we know from the information learning theory models that in multiple exposures over a certain period of time will increase retention. And so, you know, the drill-based activities are actually quite good. They are. We see that in athletics. We see it in a lot of areas. Drills can be useful to help build some of the fundamentals, but they shouldn't make up the entire system. And that's where I think we're making a mistake. We're trying to build a model of personalization around a tool that should be used to actually get a person started. It's a starting point. Or if it's not a starting point, it's a practice point, right? Where students can involve themselves in some deliberate practice, which again is a very good thing, right? We have to realize that learning is really about making those meaningful connections, and at times being able to identify the dots effectively is really important if you're going to connect the dots. And so having these types of tools can be extremely useful, and I have used them. I've used them with my own boys. I've purchased software that help my boys with math and spelling, and they play the different games. There's a Spelling Invaders game where you've got letters that are following and they're typing, or typing games that do the same thing. Wonderful tools to help, but you can't build personalized learning around that because they actually only deal with a very, very small aspect of what the learner does. Personalized learning is really addressing the learner where they are at and recognizing some of that rote memorization and some of those fundamental skills that are necessary for a learner to develop. When we're looking at how they would use those skills to solve a bigger problem with critical analytical thinking, to address a real world learning opportunity, a real world problem. So quite often, if you use the context of a real world learning opportunity that the learner is interested in, that is personalized to them because it's their problem. It's what they're looking to solve. And then these wonderful tools can be used if a learner has to practice some of the mathematical skills, or they have to practice some of the writing skills, the grammar skills. These tools are something that you can fall back on as a learner is working towards solving a bigger problem. And unfortunately, we often get it backwards. We focus on the remedial stuff, and then we try to explain that, well, you could use it someday down the road in a real world setting, and we don't go down that path. And because of the data points that you had mentioned, what gets measured gets done, and we have this tendency to look at certain data points more so than others. That's a subject for another topic about how we actually don't use data in education very well. And the data that we use is very, very limited. And we're looking at simple things like, computer aided instruction data points as opposed to other data points that are going to be more important. So if we go down this path by focusing on these simple tools, then we lose sight of the fact that it's, the actual problems and the real world projects that are providing the context for learning. And that is what makes learning personalized. That is where a learner chooses a particular problem that they're going to solve. They're going to build something. They're going to create something, right? And then you identify the skills and the tools and the resources and abilities you need as you're going along. And these wonderful tools can be used in a just-in-time basis. So again, there's a tendency for us to look at that quick fix, if you recall our previous discussion. So have I summarized things well? Do you see where I'm going with the fact that I think we've kind of got it backwards in the same way we had the Genius Hour and 20% time backwards? What are your thoughts?
As you were talking, great explanation. I was thinking about deliberate practice right before you said it. I think about 10 seconds before you said it, and I thought, gosh, that is exactly what I would have equated this conversation to. And I think of your boys. Naturally, when I think of deliberate practice, I think of your boys and the many stories we've talked about, biking and building businesses and all of that. That's very personalized to them, and they're learning too, right? But one of the challenges I think teachers face is time. How do I personalize learning for all of my students in a day? And maybe I have 25. And how do I do that? I find people, teachers will get frustrated and quit. I can't do this for every single student, and I think about the opportunities that are there that maybe they're just not seeing. So maker spaces, that's an opportunity, a little bit of time set aside each week where they can go in and actually work on something authentic or solve a real world problem. Maybe the teacher posts during their science time a question on the board, and they have to find a way to solve that, or maybe they work in groups. There's ways to work this in if they do one thing, and that's shift their focus, as you talked about. So, yes, we still need to cover these rote skills, the content area skills, but if we shift that focus to authentic learning experiences, then it becomes personalized. It may not be, yes, it's meeting every kid at their level. It may not be pushing content. That's not meeting every kid at their level. Pushing content is not the same thing. It does help, but it's not what personalized learning actually is. Does that make sense?
Oh, it
That's
does.
factor? Yeah.
It really does. And I think I want to address the issue of time, because you and I deal with this on a very significant basis with the DLL program. And I had a conversation yesterday with a student in the program who is an unconventional student. He's not in a traditional teaching role. He's in an educational institution, and he's working in a supervisory role. And he has some very significant and unique challenges. And he was trying to fit his innovation plan into the traditional educational model, and he's not a traditional educator. And it was interesting. I saw him struggling with some of the assignments, and I was going back with emails and creating the feedback videos. And then at one point I said, listen, we need to talk, because I need to understand where you're at. And we had already spent a fair amount of time going back and forth with exchanges. And when we finally talked the other day, I had the opportunity to identify some things that he could do, or some challenges that he was facing. So he's in an educational setting. And one of his biggest challenges is that he works with offices in 3 different locations: communication, collaboration, everything's paper based, and yet we've got all these resources. And so as we talked, one of his biggest challenges is moving his organization into a digital environment, paperless office. So he was looking at trying to do something conventional, and when there was this problem that was staring him right in the face. And once I got him to realize that, listen, you could go down that path. And he said, oh, if I could just get people to use Zoom or Skype, it would save us hours each, days each week, because right now we travel everywhere, and it takes a whole bunch of time. And so through that conversation, and that conversation didn't take that long. I don't think we were on the Zoom session for longer than 20 or 30 minutes. And I had already spent 15 or 20 minutes going back and forth, struggling with trying to help him resolve a problem that really couldn't be resolved. And so sometimes I think we need to take a certain amount of time at the beginning. And Bruner talks about this in his 4 steps for learning, and that is looking at the learner's preparedness. Very simply, where is the learner at? It wasn't until I had the conversation with the student, I says, tell me about what you're doing. Tell me about your work. Tell me about your environment. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the problems? And it doesn't take long when you give a learner an opportunity to identify some things that they would like to fix, or some things that they'd like to address. And once we went down that path and I simply listened to where this learner was at, it then gave me the opportunity to say, well, what if you could do this? What if you could do that? And I said, well, what we're doing right now in this Zoom session, wouldn't that be a cool thing to do with your people that you're working with? And as soon as he made the connection between, wow, you know what, these amazing digital tools that we use in the educational setting could make people's lives more efficient. We also connected the fact that even though he wasn't directly involved with teaching learners, his people and the work that he did had a direct impact on the learners. And if his people had more time to engage with his learners and put them at ease and help them out, it would make everybody's lives that much better. And so the idea of using tools to make your life more efficient so that you could spend more time with a learner and to help them and to encourage and support gave him his why. So again, that 20 minutes of conversation um, was time I had to take, but it really is time well spent, because now as we go forward, I'm not going to have to spend 20 minutes or half an hour. It might be 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, or even if I have to spend a significant amount of time, what we're doing is we're working on solving his real world problem. And that is personalized learning. I gave him choice, which he did take. He worked through that choice. He recognized that he could own a real world problem of establishing a paperless office. That's what we labeled it, right? Or a digital workspace, a digital office. So we have this real project that he can then look to some of these tools to help him with professional development and help some of his people. And once you've got that focus on that real world problem that you're looking at, those skills, those abilities, those tools, those resources then have a place to fit.
Yeah.
And they then become very, very useful and beneficial. And it isn't that they cause the personalization. No, they don't. They're tools that help in the work that you've done in looking at that personal learning environment and helping the learner to identify what it is that they can work on and make a difference in other people's lives. The ownership, I love seeing the eyes light up, and there's a pause in the conversation when a student goes, wow, if I could, wow, you know what, this could work. It's one of those, man, that could really make a difference. When you start to get that sort of a, oh man, I've got to do this. And the conversation changes from, oh, what should I be doing, to, okay, Dr. H, okay, I got to go. I have some ideas, got to write them down. I'll be in touch. Don't worry, I'm on this. It changes as soon as they own it. It's wonderful to see. That's personalized learning. That's individualized instruction. That is differentiated learning. It's not the tool. It's not the software. It's actually what you and I do with learners. We're social beings.
Yes.
Personalized learning is connecting with your learner, is taking the time to find out who they are. What do they do? What do they like? What are they passionate about? What are they interested in doing? How do they want to change their world? And then helping them to sort of ignite a few sparks to start making those changes. That's what I think is personalized learning. What do you think?
Great example. I just have to highlight something I thought of. In the word personalized is personal, right? The word personal. What you did with a student was build that personal relationship of care and trust that no computer could build with a person. So you really took it to that level. And once the students feel that they can trust and care, trust and work with their professor or their teacher, whoever that is, it opens a world of opportunity, just like the student had. You know, I think yesterday I read a Facebook post from a math teacher. She said in her post, I am so busy teaching math content and standards. Sometimes I forget to stop and listen to my students and find out where they're at. We are so quick to skip over the learner preparedness. We talked about that. And so quick to jump to what it is we know we have to do, that if we were to just pedal backwards a little bit and focus on that personal side of personalized learning and building that relationship and that trust and that connection, I think that's where students learn it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail forward. It's okay to have, I do have a mentor. I do have someone that is going to connect with me, help me through this. And, you know, when I think of these things, I think about, you know, adult learners, but this is also for kids too. Kids can experience that connection, feel safe with you, and then go out and make some choices of their own. You know, it's hard for me to say this, but what's true is, as an elementary teacher that I once was, that I'll always be in my heart, what I thought was giving my kids choice and personalized learning is actually the complete opposite of what I was giving them. This is long before I did a lot of research in this field and started working together in our program. You know, putting a choice board out there is not really giving them choice. It's not really personalizing anything for them. They just choose off of a board. When they're choosing off of a board, they're not really taking ownership of what they're doing. They're doing something you asked them to do. They don't really have a voice in what they chose other than that selection. So it kind of defies the purpose of choice, ownership, and voice through authentic learning. So if I did things differently, I would do what you did, build that relationship, and now I see this. Now I see the value in this. If I want my kids to really experience personalized learning, I have to build that relationship with them, you know, as an instructor, as a classroom teacher. So thanks for bringing that to light, because if we are not spending that time sort of evaluating their preparedness and our own receptiveness to that, we might be missing an opportunity with our students to help them grow and become lifelong learners. And that's what we want, right?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think one of the ways that we can remind ourselves to shift our focus from being a teacher who delivers content to being perhaps a learning facilitator or a coach or a mentor who helps a learner become successful in their learning journey and helps them to get to the point that they need to get to, is that if we really view our roles differently, right? I often tell my learners that my job is to help them be successful. I'm your coach. I'm your mentor. I come alongside.
I
My
care.
job is to ask those questions. My job is to cheerlead every once in a while. My job is to help them be successful, right? So my job isn't to give them the content that they need. At times, yeah, I can do that too, because I can point them to an article. I can have them read this, or this is a book you should take a look at. This is an article. Here's a video you want to see. Yeah, our job is to point them to amazing resources that are available that will help them get to where they're going in their journey. But again, as Hattie's research shows, listen, if you want your students to achieve, you develop that trusted relationship and you provide that feedback. And as we know from our research, feedback for learners in our context is that dialogue. It isn't us just telling them stop. No, it's that interaction. It's coming alongside. It's having this Zoom meeting. It's having that Skype meeting. It's having that quick phone call where your learner says, oh, Dr. H, I tried doing this. My principal didn't like that idea. I'm dead in the water. What do I do now? Well, listen, you might need to pivot. This particular perspective and the way that you're looking to implement it might not work, and you wanted to implement your strategy across the whole school. Maybe we need to just pull back and do a pilot first. Oh yeah, well, the principal did say that was a good way to start. Sometimes all it takes is that conversation, right? And when your learner is discouraged or frustrated or annoyed, as a coach and mentor, sometimes your role is to go, hey, I've been there too. I know how you feel. It sucks. But guess what? Fight the good fight, keep on going. I got over it by doing this. And I think you're going to be okay if you maybe go down this path, right? That's feedback. That's coaching. That's mentoring. Also, part of that is reminding your learner that, listen, what we are working towards is changing the world one learner at a time. What we are working towards is creating these learning environments where we prepare our learners for the future, right? We are preparing our learners for life, not just for the test. And if we remind the people we're working with that, the reason they went into education wasn't for the big bucks. No, most people have this big dream of changing lives and just seeing those epiphany moments in learners' eyes. So we need to remind them of why they got into this in the first place, and that sometimes what they're doing isn't as widely respected and regarded as it should be. But at the same time, if you can ignite that passion and desire in a learner, and there's always one or two or three teachers in a learner's life that made a difference, right? We hear that. Oh, I remember my social teacher, my science teacher. I remember when she did this and it changed everything and made me realize that I could do these things. We hear these stories. So if you can go into these relationships with your learner, recognizing you have an opportunity to help them and maybe help them change the world, wow, it makes all the difference in the world. And that is personalized learning. Because as you said, we need to put the person back into personalized learning. And that's that personal relationship. That's that personal interaction. That is that one-on-one or one on a small group. It is letting your learner know that you understand them, you're there for them, you're in their corner, you're going to coach and mentor them, and you're going to help them through this, whatever the challenge may be. And when they are extremely successful, you're their biggest cheerleader. So when you see them walking across the stage, which is what you get to do often at graduation, you know what role you had to play in helping to get them there. And then you know that they are going to take what they've learned and just ignite this passion in other learners too. So it's important. Personalized learning is really putting that person back into the notion of learning. Important thing.
I think we've covered the topic pretty good. Do you have any other thoughts on this before we?
Yeah, I think we have. I think we need to touch on a few more things in terms of some of the tools that are out there. And I've been looking at some of the research on that, and I'll be sharing some of those links in the page where he posts this. But yeah, I think we've covered it quite well. Looking forward to seeing what the reaction is to this. So yeah, I think we've got it. So we'll say goodbye for now, and I look forward to the next discussion.